Hey guys, it's Angelo, and welcome to my Shadow Priest rotation guide for the launch of Chains of Domination in patch 9.1. Patch 9.1 is the perfect time for you to get back into the Shadow Priest, learning what has changed in comparison to the Shadowlands launch patch, and in what better way than with a step-by-step guide of this new rotation we'll be playing this patch. A lot of things have changed for the Shadow Priest throughout the course of the expansion so far, and if you haven't stayed up to date on all of my update videos in the past, of course, well, there's a lot you were missing, but this video should set you on the right path to master the Shadow Priest's new rotation in World of Warcraft's newest expansion. Now in the video, we'll be covering everything you'll need to know, so how to deal the most damage in single target, straightforward situations, how to maximize your damage depending on the amount of enemies in combat with you, and how to use your cooldowns and your talents the most effectively. We'll also be going into detail on how exactly the Covenant abilities or legendaries alter your rotation, and how to implement these factors into your gameplay. Now, if you would like to join the discussion with anything World of Warcraft related, be sure to join our Discord server with the link in the description box below. Also, just a quick reminder, I am streaming on Twitch every weekday, or at least I'm trying to at least every raid weekday, with my schedule currently shifting around a little bit because of all of the videos I am making right now, but you will most definitely see me return back to Twitch from 6 PM to 11 PM, so be sure to tune in if you have any questions, and of course that is Central European time. Apart from that, I know that you all can't wait to prepare yourselves for Shadowlands patch 9.1, so let's go right ahead and have a look. Okay, so before we get into the details, we need to take a little step back and just summarize really quick what has changed for you as a Shadow Priest with the patch 9.1 rotation. The simple answer is not much when it comes to your rotation specifically. Since talents have remained essentially identical, and legendary picks this content will also not really change, this leaves us with the same gameplay as before. Devouring Plague has been nerfed, which sees our single target or pure single target potency slightly reduced, while both Vampiric Touch and Shadow Word Pain have been buffed relatively significantly. For a multi-target scenario, this actually means that our damage is going up a little, but at the cost of slightly reduced raw single target. When looking at the Sanctum of Domination, the single target nerf isn't that bad for us due to many factors. First off, only a few bosses are purely single target based, and the majority of bosses sees us fight ads. Secondly, our single target was already a considerable amount above most, if not all other classes and specs, so this nerf simply brings us more in line with the rest of the group. Our legendaries were also nerfed, with the Shadowflame Prism getting the harder nerf of the two between it and Talbadar's Stratagem. This won't really change anything in the meta of the legendary items though, and you will most likely continue to play with the Shadowflame Prism in most scenarios. All in all, the fact that basically nothing changes is actually a good thing, because this keeps our already quite engaging rotation the way it currently is, which is very good. Alright, let's move on and actually look at the rotation. Alright, so as most of you probably know, your rotation revolves around a builder and spender playstyle. We will build up Insanity with our core builders naturally by applying Shadow Word Pain and Vampiric Touch onto the targets, and then just using Mind Blast on cooldown while we fill with Mind Flay, while certain talents help us build Insanity as well, those being Auspicious Spirits, Void Torrent, Shadow Crash, and Mindbender. Once we're at 50 Insanity, the threshold required to use Devouring Plague, we will then spend the Insanity on Devouring Plague and essentially just repeat the cycle. That in and of itself is the core and the basic concept of your rotation. Build Insanity with everything in your core kit, and then spend it on Devouring Plague once available. Whereas the basic construct of the rotation is fairly easy, it has incredible amounts of elevation it can go through, making it not only more fun, but also more difficult to manage depending on the amount of targets you are up against, the talents you're using, your stats, and other factors which make the play, or rather the spec, play incredibly engaging in literally any situation, even in single target. The challenge ultimately lies in managing your builders in order not to overcap on insanity, spending your insanity accordingly before you overcap or waste insanity, and maintaining your dots on all targets. Now, the challenge specifically of not overcapping insanity is the most important one to keep in mind, apart from keeping the dots up, because with current legendaries, gear and talents, overcapping becomes much easier as it was back in 9.0 or 9.0.5. In a typical single target situation in Shadowlands, your rotation is actually quite simple and revolves around proper use of Devouring Plague, Void Torrent or Mindbender, and your builder abilities. When playing with the Shadowflame Prism, your go-to legendary, your opener and rotation would look like this. Engage the fight by applying your dots, then use Fey Guardians if you're a Night Fae, and immediately after use your Mindbender. After your Mindbender, you want to cast Shadow Word Death, then Mind Blast, and then use a Power Infusion into a Void Eruption. The first thing you want to do in Void form is hit a Void Bolt immediately, and from here on just prioritize Mind Blast once it's ready, Void Bolt and Shadow Word Death, while dumping as much insanity as possible into Devouring Plague, and filling with Mind Flay should nothing else be ready. If Void Bolt and Mind Blast are ready simultaneously, you will want to hit the Void Bolt, unless you could get another Shadowflame Prism proc out with the Mind Blast, but this scenario is comparatively rare in your opener. Do this until you drop out of Void form, at which point you will just follow our standard priorities. Use Mind Blast, fill with Mind Flay, and once Devouring Plague is ready to be used, immediately cast it on the enemy. Refresh your dots, don't forget about your Distant Echoes procs, and rinse and repeat the process. If the fight duration is long enough for you to wait until Void form is ready again to pair it with the Mindbender, you will delay Mindbender. If the fight duration isn't long enough, you will not delay it. When playing with Talbot or Stratagem, you will essentially play the same base rotation, however you will want to use a Void Torrent on cooldown and want to maximize using Mind Blasts with all 3 dots active on the target as much as possible, basically all the time. The more targets you have to deal with, the more complex your rotation will become, but in single target situations, the single highest priority will always be to achieve enough insanity to cast Devouring Plague. In multi-target situations, you'll essentially be following the same basic rules, but your rotation becomes a set of priorities you need to follow, and the better you do, the more damage of course you will then deal. You'll be applying your dots onto targets, building insanity through builders and talents, then spending it on either Devouring Plague or by spamming Searing Nightmare, which is usable at 30 insanity. If you're not playing with Searing Nightmare, you will just want to apply your dots with Misery and spend your insanity on Devouring Plague, while playing the aforementioned Mindbender or Void Torrent rotation, replacing Mind Flay with Mindseer at 3 targets. In Mythic Plus, you will most likely be playing much more with Searing Nightmare and will spend your insanity on it accordingly. When playing with the Shadowflame Prism, you will prioritize using the Shadowflame Prism by using Mind Blast and Shadow Word Death on cooldown while maintaining your regular Searing Nightmare gameplay in between the downtime. Your spell priorities should be on screen now, because again, our rotation is honestly just a spell priority at this point, and it's our job of course to track and manage this list as effectively as possible. Now, let's take a look at your cooldowns and talents and how they change your rotation. The Shadow Priest has 2 cooldowns baseline and an incredible variety when it comes to the talents. Now, though most of these talents are quite straightforward at this point, you can still mix and match a couple of these in patch 9.1. So again, let's look at our cooldowns. Our maintenance of set cooldowns is actually slightly different now than it was at the launch of the expansion, but still relatively simple. When playing with Talbot or Stratagem or any non-Shadowflame Prism legendary, you will want to keep Void Form and Power Infusion on cooldown. Should your last Power Infusion line up with a Void Form, you will want to delay it in order to pair them one last time during a fight. When playing with the Shadow Flame Prism, you will want to try to pair Void Form and Mindbender as good as possible, unless you inevitably won't get a chance to due to the short remaining time on a boss fight, which is when you will just have to use them when they're ready. Ideally, you will be able to just use them, or rather judge when to use them when looking at the boss or mob HP, but generally speaking you will save Mindbender until your Void Form is back up shortly after. Void Form is the essence of your damage and will boost your damage once every 90 seconds, but as a Night Fae a little bit less, about every 50 seconds, by a considerable amount. Power Infusion grants you 25% haste and is therefore also incredibly powerful. Now Power Infusion's cooldown is set to 2 minutes, whereas Void Form's cooldown, again baseline, is at 90 seconds. Ideally, you will just want to use both on cooldown when not playing with the Mindbender build, but if the difference in their cooldown of being back up again is at around 10 seconds, ideally even less so, then it becomes an option to wait for both cooldowns to line back up. But again, this is only relevant when not playing with the Shadow Flame Prism build. I'll let you of course also be the judge of this, because this will of course depend on the situation ahead of you. When in a single target boss, for example, ready to get into the execute stages of the fight, it will probably be worthwhile waiting the extra 10 seconds, but not really more, to have the cooldowns align. In Mythic Plus, when moving from trash pack to trash pack, this option may also become attractive to you. With the Shadow Flame Prism, your Power Infusion will be ready after every second Void Form Mindbender combo, so basically you will play your first Void Form with a Power Infusion, your second one without a Power Infusion, and your third one with a Power Infusion again. Okay, let's jump ahead and take a look at our talents. Unfurling Darkness, even though hardly ever used in PvE, will be used to apply an instant cast Vampiric Touch to a target every 15 seconds. Death and Madness will be used to snipe some extra 40 insanity from a target right before it dies, and is your go-to option for Mythic Plus currently, where you can utilize its insanity generation immensely, especially when paired with the Shadow Flame Prism, as it allows you not only to generate insanity on the fly and carry it from trash pack to trash pack, but also to extend the uptime of your Mindbender significantly. Searing Nightmare specifically will be used when you have too many mobs in front of you to handle with misery, and for a longer period of time. Currently, Searing Nightmare does very high amounts of damage in Mythic Plus, and will generally speaking be the go-to talent and playstyle to use in Mythic Plus dungeons, at least for low to mid-level keys. Misery loses out slightly in most Mythic Plus scenarios at the moment, even though with the Shadow Flame Prism it has become a lot more powerful, but it does still have a ramp up time, so ideally you don't want to waste as much time dotting when you could also use Searing Nightmare instead. The point at which dotting up targets with Vampiric Touch shouldn't be a priority anymore is at 5 targets, but it's ultimately very reliant upon the trash pack that you are fighting. If, for example, you're fighting 5 trash mobs, but 2 of those 5 die within the first 5 seconds of the fight, then using Vampiric Touch on all 5 of course is not worth their global cooldowns. Also, the point when to start spamming Searing Nightmare has shifted in comparison to last patch, and it's very plausible now to use Searing Nightmare at 3 targets flat. Back in the Shadowlands launch meta, Searing Nightmare was quite strong, and this honestly continues to be the case. Damnation is another PvP-oriented talent, but in PvE it will be held on cooldown and can also be used when you'd have to move, while Mindbender and Void Torrent have their uses mostly structured behind the legendaries that suit them best. Currently, Mindbender and accordingly the Shadow Flame Prism will be the option you will most likely be choosing the most, and when playing with this combination, it becomes incredibly important to prioritize it. You will, as stated before, prioritize your Shadow Flame Prism rotation while doing your best to fill the gaps with Mind Seers and Searing Nightmares in Mythic Plus. With Void Torrent, you will simply play your baseline rotation and keep Void Torrent on cooldown, effectively speaking. Shadow Crash can be used with both of the legendary options if you so choose, and is very strong in Mythic Plus. Ideally, you will use it on cooldown if as many enemies as possible are stacked up together. Alright. Since I've given the Night Fae a lot of attention in this video, let's go ahead and take a look at the other Covenant options for those of you who chose not to play Night Fae. So, covenants are a big part of Shadowlands, and accordingly, so are the covenant spells you will be able to use with each covenant tied to them. This is no different in patch 9.1. All 4 covenants have an active priest-specific ability to use, and all 4 of them alter your rotation in some way, mostly very minor, but some are slightly deeper. I'll go into detail with which covenant you will want to be playing, rather with and why, in my Shadow Priest guide, so be sure to click the link in the little info tab on the top right corner of your screen if you want to know more about that. In this video, we'll be going over the focus specifically on how they are used in combat. Starting us off will be the most complicated one, which will be the Boon of the Ascended. The Boon of the Ascended needs to be activated via a cast time before changing into the Ascended Blast and the Ascended Nova. The Blast will be your main source of damage during this time, as it does deal a ton of damage and wants to essentially be kept on cooldown. It scales with your haste, but the general rule of thumb is that you will be able to fill 2 global cooldowns in between each cast of Ascended Blast. Ideally, you will want to activate the Boon of the Ascended while in Void form in order to maximize its damage output and to also have an easier time filling these 2 global cooldowns with instant spells such as Devouring Plague or Void Bolt. In single target situations, you will rinse and repeat this, so filling 2 global cooldowns, then spending a blast until the boon expires and explodes, in which case you will want to stand in melee range to let the detonation hit your enemies. On multi-target or AoE fights, you will fill the 2 global cooldowns with your Ascended Nova, which is an instant cast, before then using your Ascended Blast when it's ready. You can also Mind Seer and Searing Nightmare once between each Ascended Blast. There's multiple ways honestly to approach this, I'll let you be the judge of that. Just be sure not to miss a single blast, because those hit for crazy levels of damage. Unholy Nova will pretty much just be kept on cooldown. Just be sure to allow its dot component, Unholy Transfusion, to have at least 15 seconds of uptime if you can. Fey Guardians will be used before entering a Void form typically, or before using the Mindbender when playing with the Shadowflame Prism. Mind Games will basically be held on cooldown. The best time is during Void form when you have a cooldown to spare after other priorities have already been taken care of. Okay, let's summarize everything we've just discussed. Gameplay-wise, the Shadow Priest certainly keeps its charm, flavor, and competitiveness with a good rounded rotation in patch 9.1. Be sure to prepare yourself for some possible nerfs in the upcoming Mythic raiding weeks, as Shadow Priest may still be tuned a little bit too high in comparison to other classes. Our legendaries now dictate our playstyle much more than before, and that is probably the only negative thing, because the standard rotation and playstyle was already quite engaging and fun, and it does get a little bit suppressed by the ever so dominant Shadowflame Prism playstyle. As this playstyle is fun in itself as well though, this isn't too bad at the end of the day. Shadow Priests are looking to remain a top contender for the undisputed top, this time potentially not only in single target, but also in multi-target. It remains to be seen. Be sure to let me know what you think in the comments down below. Are you excited to play Shadow this patch? Have you re-rolled to the spec from previously playing another perhaps? Honestly, I'd be interested in knowing your thoughts, so be sure to share them with us in the comments. Apart from that, as always, a special thanks to all of my supporters over on Patreon as well as on Twitch. You guys are awesome and help out a lot. Don't forget to catch me live when 9.1 goes live, with the link to my channels down below. Now, as always, my friends, have a good one, have a lot of fun in patch 9.1, and I will see you all in the next one.